You're listening to Let's Talk Creation with Todd Wood and Paul Garner, the creation show where we learn, grow, and worship.
Well, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Creation with Paul Garner and Todd Wood. I'm Paul Garner.
And I'm Todd Wood.
It's great to be with you again. Welcome back if you're a regular listener, and welcome for the first time if you're a new listener. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so that you get notified of all of our new content, and do share us around. Tell your friends about us. Share the podcast, share our episodes, encourage others to subscribe. That is all really, really helpful as we seek to grow our audience and reach new people. So we are very grateful for all your help in doing that. Well, we have another interesting episode here, Todd, in our Creationism 101 series. Those who are regular listeners will know that we have been doing this intermittent series where we're trying to explain, present creationist beliefs about Genesis in an accessible way. What we're trying to do is sort of explain the basics of creationist belief in a way that anybody could understand. We're not wanting to sort of talk about cutting edge research or new discoveries or sort of get into the weeds of something that's really sort of deep and complicated. We're just giving standard creationist ideas that just about any creationist is going to agree with as we're working our way through the text of Genesis 1 to 11. So that's what we're doing, and we're here for another installment.
And we have plenty of episodes, as you know, that talk about the deep stuff and get off into the weeds and the research, and even some controversial stuff, supposedly. But this is, at the end of the day, a show that's supposed to be for everyone. It's not supposed to be just for, eggheads who get excited about really complicated business. It should be something for everyone. So, I think Creationism 101 is a really good series, and I'm really happy we're doing it. We have covered already the Creation Week. We did the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, which is creation from nothing. And then in the most recent episode that we just recorded, we talked about the relationship of Genesis 1 and 2, where we went through all the nitpicky details. We nitpicked it apart to figure out if Genesis 1 contradicts Genesis 2. And we concluded the rumors of contradictions are greatly exaggerated. So that's where things stand now.
We should remind our audience that links to all those past episodes will be in the show notes. So do go back and check that out. If you're a new listener, you might want to sort of play catch up. If you're a regular listener, you may want to go back and review what we've already covered. But they'll all be there in the show notes. Now, as you say, we're coming into this new episode. We're moving on now into Genesis chapter 2. We want to look at the events of Genesis chapter 2 and how young age creationists read those events, how we understand those events. As you said in the previous episode, we looked at a whole list of alleged contradictions, discrepancies between Genesis 1 and 2. But in that episode, we were kind of mostly focused on thinking about sort of nitpicky details, as you say. We were thinking about the timing of events and, the order in which events happened. We didn't really cover in much detail the events themselves. So that's what we're going to do in this episode. So let's come on to that. So technically, when we go sort of open our Bibles, we go to Genesis 2. This chapter actually begins with the closing of the Creation Week. We've already sort of covered that part, so we're not going to dwell on that. But there is a really interesting verse 4 of Genesis chapter 2, which is a kind of bridge, a kind of transition from the Creation Week account to the account of the creation of Adam and the Garden of Eden. And verse 4 says this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. At least that's the NIV, that's the New International Version. The Authorized Version, the King James Version, says this: these are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. So in these two translations, we have a very similar rendering of verse 4, but they differ in that the King James Version uses that word generations. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth. And in the NIV, the New International Version, that same word is translated as account. This is the account of the heavens and the earth. That word that is translated as either generations or as account is the word in Hebrew toledot. Toledot. It's a word that occurs 39 times in the Old Testament, 13 of which are found in the book of Genesis. And in Genesis, these toledot statements basically follow a sort of formula. We read, these are the toledot of X, Y, Z. Okay. And they usually precede a genealogy, at least in the book of Genesis. So an example is Genesis chapter 5, which opens with these words: "This is the book of the generations of Adam." And then it sort of moves into this list, this famous list of pre-flood patriarchs and their ages, the genealogy. There are also toledots for the sons of Noah, which then precedes the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. There are toledots for Shem in Genesis 11, for Ishmael in Genesis 25, and for Esau in Genesis 36. And also in some places, this toledot formula, these are the generations of, precedes a story. So, for example, Noah in Genesis 6, the toledot of Noah then leads obviously into the story of the flood. The toledot of Terah in Genesis chapter 11 leads into the story of Abraham. Ishmael in Genesis 25, who we've just mentioned, and Esau in Genesis 36, they both have separate toledots that then lead into stories about those patriarchs. Isaac, the same about Isaac, Genesis 25, Jacob in Genesis 37. So we have this formula. These are the generations of, this is the account of, and then it leads into a genealogy or a story about the biblical character. So this sort of formula, this toledot formula, is really interesting because it gives, in effect, the whole book of Genesis a kind of unifying structure. That there's a kind of framework that the author has put in place here. And just incidentally, I mean, one of the other things that's really interesting about this formula is that it connects the early chapters of Genesis to the later chapters of Genesis. And I think it's one of those reasons that as creationists, we want to say that those early chapters of Genesis are every bit as historical as the later chapters of Genesis. You know, there are Christians, aren't there, who want to say that Genesis 1 to 11, the early part of Genesis, that's a kind of mythological narrative. It's a kind of, or a mytho-history, as I think William Lane Craig has called it. And so you have this sort of mythical sort of part of Genesis that ends at chapter 11. And then you move into the truly historical stuff, you know, with Abraham and the Isaac and Jacob and the other patriarchs. Now, I don't think that works because this Toledot formula actually runs all the way through, right the way through Genesis. It just kind of cuts right across that distinction that people are trying to make. And whatever the author of Genesis is trying to communicate with this Toledot formula, it seems to me that whatever it means for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it also means for Adam and Noah and Shem. Okay, so it unifies those. There's a unifying sort of structure and framework that puts those things together. We can't artificially separate and divide them, I think.
Yeah. And expanding on that, then the Toledotes throughout the rest of Genesis are about people, but here we have the Toledot of the heavens and the earth.
Yes.
So that's a difference. It's another one of those differences. We talked in the last episode in the series about the difference between a difference and a contradiction. Here's another one of those differences. We have a Toledot of the heavens and the earth. And in that way, it's kind of capping the account in Genesis 1 of the days of creation.
Yeah.
And I know I'm kind of going out on a limb here and saying it's a conclusion. Most people understand the Toledotes as being an introduction. But that would make this Toledot the introduction to Adam and Eve. This is the account of the heavens and the earth. But that would be odd because it's really the account of just Adam and Eve in the garden and not really an account of the whole heavens and the earth. And, when you look through Genesis 2, it's not about the heavens at all, right? The heavens are only mentioned when they talk about the birds that fly in the heavens. Otherwise, the heavens are definitely front and center in Genesis 1. God creates the heavens. God creates the firmament. He places the sun, moon, and stars in the expanse and so forth. So the heavens are definitely in view in Genesis 1. So, in that way, then I would say, this particular Toledo does seem to serve as a real interesting transition between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. It's kind of capping off what happened there and setting our attention on what's coming next. And if I may add one more point, I think, again, this notion of the Toledotes creating this historical thread that runs through Genesis. Here we've got one that runs right into the creation of the heavens and the earth. So, kind of a big deal.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about the Toledot formula, and more, I'm sure, that could be said than we already have. But we need to get into the details of the chapter itself, having recognized that sort of framework. So let's come on then to Genesis 2 and following on from verse 4. So the next few verses of Genesis 2 really sort of set the stage for what's about to happen, which is the creation of Adam. We're told that Adam was made before there were plants of the field. We talked about that last time in our last 101 episode. Before there was any rain. Why was there no rain? Well, the text tells us, it says, because there was no man to till the ground. And instead of rain, we have this description of a mist that rises up and waters the surface of the ground. Now, this brings me to a pivotal question, Todd. So, do you think that this passage, when it refers to there being no rain, does that refer to the whole period before the flood? Is this text telling us that there was no rain at all before the flood? Or is it referring to something else? Because I have heard, I've heard sermons where Noah is kind of described as exercising incredible faith because, the picture is painted of this man living in this region far from the ocean, maybe a desert region, parched,
Yes.
where people don't even know what rain is, and yet he's exercising faith in building this enormous boat. And I'm sure you've heard sermons along these lines. And if you press people and say, well, what's your evidence that there was no rain before the flood, that Noah and his generation never experienced rain, they will usually point to this text. They will usually point to Genesis 2, verses 5 and 6, and say there was no rain. Do you think that's right? Do you think that's the correct interpretation? I'm putting you on the spot here.
You are putting me on the spot. We're supposed to be avoiding controversy here and saying things that creationists generally believe. So let me put it this way. I think that's a very common opinion, common interpretation. Very common. So I would also say there is a minority of creationists. There are other creationists who think that these verses do not refer to no rain at all before the flood. They would say that the actual emphasis here is on people tilling the ground, that the emphasis is on agriculture, the plants of the field, planting of the garden, tilling the ground, all that sort of putting the Adam in there to tend and keep the garden, all of that stuff is to draw our attention to the human role of cultivating plants. And that's not really intended to be a big universal statement. So we said in the previous episode, plants of the field, and the creation of animals may not be intended to be understood as an kind of an ultimate universal chronological statement there about the origin of these things. I would also say that, the statement that there was no rain before Adam was there to till the ground is meant just like that and not meant to be, the ultimate pronouncement on the global water cycle before the flood. I don't see it that way. So, yeah, but I would say that is not the majority opinion. The majority opinion, if you were just to take a survey of creationists, I would say the majority of creationists would agree that there was no rain before the flood. Now, I'd also add this. People get really worked up about Noah and his faith, and the story gets non-biblically embellished. Let's put it that way, right? So it's one thing to say Noah exercised faith because he'd never seen it rain. I mean, at least there's a biblical verse there that you could point to and say, this is where it says. There's nothing in the Bible that says that Noah built the ark in the desert. And if you stop to think about it, where is he getting the lumber to build the ark? This is hundreds of feet long. You've got to have really big trees to be able to do this. And you've got to have a lot of them because it's a big wooden boat. So that part of the story, A, isn't biblical. It's not said in the Bible that Noah built it in the desert. And B, it doesn't even make sense. Where is he getting the trees? That's a thing that I think we need to dial down that rhetoric. We need to bring it back down a little bit, more biblical, less embellishing, something that's at least meaningfully defensible from the text.
Yeah.
But yes, fine. Enough controversy for now. There are some creationists who think there was rain before the flood. There are, I would say, the majority of creationists who say there was no rain before the flood. And it all comes back to this verse right here. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before we move on entirely from controversy, I'm afraid I'm going to press you on something else.
Oh, great.
Because the next verse in this chapter that we come to is this one, verse 7. which says, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul."
I know what
And
you're going to
again,
say. I know what you're going to say.
I have heard people say that when we look at the elements that make up the human body, that they are basically the same as the elements that make up dust. The elemental composition of the human body matches the elemental composition of dust, and that this is a kind of confirmation of this verse. And I'm just intrigued to know what you think about that.
All right. Well, we're trying to avoid controversy here, but we're not doing a very good job of it. So that is a thing that I have heard. I've seen charts and books about that. And yes, as a biochemist, I do have some comments about this. I think this is just folklore that gets thrown around, and I don't think there's anything here that's exciting at all. Primarily because dust is mostly the particles of dead skin and dead cells that get knocked off your body. You're always growing new skin cells and peeling off the top layer. You got hair cells that are growing and dying, and then they fall out. And this kind of thing happens all the time. So most dust is just remnants of living creatures. So the idea that somehow there's something exciting about dust composition matching the composition of living creatures, well, yeah, that's where it came from. Now, if we're going to talk about soil, modern soil is just full of humus and bacteria and stuff that was formerly alive or is currently alive in some soils. So again, not a lot of excitement there for matching up dust to the composition of the human body. The non-living component of dirt and soil is largely silicate. So silica, which is ground up sand, stuff like that. That's not found in the human body at all. So, I mean, on the one hand, it's cute, but it's entirely meaningless. And when you actually look at the composition of the non-living part of the soil, it doesn't really match what we're made of. So I am not thinking that that the shaping of the body out of dirt is intended to tell us about how elements came together to form the human body. I'm not sure that this is a chemistry claim being made by the Bible. And I'm going to predict we're going to get some angry letters or angry comments about that. That and the rain before the flood. I'm sure lots of people are going to get into arguments with perfect strangers in the comment section. So you go right ahead and do that. That's a very good use of your time.
Well, okay. I'll put the controversy to one side for the time being. We'll move on. Yeah. Wanted to put you on the spot about that. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we have this verse which tells us that man was made from the dust of the ground, and one thought that immediately strikes me is that dust of the ground, that sort of foreshadows, doesn't it, God's pronouncement in the curse. We're not going to talk about that here because we'll come back to that, no doubt, in a future episode where we talk about the fall. But it also not only sort of points forward to the curse, but it also, I think, harkens back to Genesis 1, where we read that God made the animals and plants from the ground. If you go back to Genesis 1, verse 11 and 24 says, we read there that God said, let the earth bring forth plants and animals, let the earth bring forth. Now that's not the same word as ground. The word earth is not the same as ground. But it definitely, I think, reminds us that God formed the plants and animals from the ground, and he's made Adam from the dust of the earth. So although there's a contrast, humans are made in God's image. Humans are given authority over the creation. They're created to exercise dominion over the rest of creation. Nevertheless, their origin is like the plants and the animals, from the earth, from the ground. We may be God's image. We may have a special status, but we're also unquestionably part of this creation, just like all of the other living things on our world. And I think that's just an interesting both contrast and similarity between us and the other living things. Yes, we've been given a special status, but we, like them, are part of this creation.
Yeah. I think that's really important. You mentioned the Hebrew word for ground, and I think there's even more there, right? So that
Yes.
in this place, it happens to be Adama or
Yeah.
Adamah, which is the same word for human, the general human
Yeah.
or man that's used out in the Old Testament. And it also serves as the name for Adam. Adam is basically the ground. So God makes humans from the ground and calls the first one ground. Congratulations, you're
Right.
ground. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
It gets lost in translation, but it really affirms what you just said. In chapter 1, humans have this exalted creation as God's image and authority on earth. And here they're just a humble part of the rest of creation. And God basically calls him dirt.
Yeah. So it's kind of humbling
Yeah.
that we, Adam is given that name, that the man is given that name. He is basically from the earth, earthy, as I think Paul says, doesn't he, in 1 Corinthians 15. Now, next, in this chapter, we have God planting a garden where he puts Adam. And, of course, in the garden, there are these two significant trees. There's the tree of life, and there's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Obviously, they're very significant in the story that unfolds. But we've also got this description, quite a detailed description of Eden, and particularly the river that sort of flows out of the garden, divides into 4 rivers, into 4 heads. And 2 of them, if you read the text, are given the ancient names for the Tigris and the Euphrates, those 2 great rivers of ancient Mesopotamia. And there's an enormous amount of talk. Again, if you Google this, and you'll find that there's an enormous amount of discussion about where was the Garden of Eden located? Can we use these geographical references in Genesis 2, these references to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, to locate Eden in the modern world? And here's a point of difference where young age creationists actually have quite a different sort of perspective on this, because from our sort of understanding of what the Bible goes on to say about the flood, these rivers and Eden itself, that original creation, they were destroyed in the flood. They would have been washed away by the worldwide flood. So the geography that's described here in Genesis 2, even though it uses some familiar terms, cannot be referring to modern Mesopotamia from our sort of creationist understanding. And I think that's quite interesting, because when you actually pay careful attention to the description here, it actually doesn't really match modern geography. So, for example, the Tigris and the Euphrates, the modern rivers, they do not originate from the same source. They merge into a single river, but they don't have the same source. So it does seem to be different to what's being described in the text of Genesis 2. And I think, as creationists, many have pointed out previously, when people move, when they migrate from an old world to a new world, they often take names with them. So, for example, there's a York in the north of England. There's New York in America, because that name was taken across the Atlantic Ocean. One of my favorite examples is Newcastle. There's a place called Newcastle in the northeast of England, and in Australia, there is also a Newcastle. And interestingly, they are both famous for their coal deposits.
Oh,
They're coal mining areas.
weird.
And I've never really looked into the history of it, but I imagine Newcastle in Australia was called that because it reminded people of Newcastle in England.
Yeah.
Because of the coal.
Yeah.
So, when we look at this description of Eden, I think as creationists, we'd say Eden is not modern Iraq. This is
Right.
This is a geography that no longer exists on the surface of the earth today.
Right. Yeah. I completely agree. I always roll my eyes when I see somebody talking about, well, maybe Eden's up here or Eden's over here. No, it's gone. It's completely gone. There's nothing left of it. It was wiped out in the flood. So,
yeah.
Anyway, so God places Adam in the garden, and he's there to take care of the garden. And God tells him to eat whatever he wants, except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he tells him, in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. And people make a big deal out of that phrase because, obviously, as we're going to see in the next chapter, Adam and Eve did eat that fruit, and they did not drop dead on the very day that they ate. So how do we explain that? Now, I have some ideas of my own, but I would say the most common creationist explanation is that in the day there, that phrase, again, is a non-specific phrase, basically meaning when you eat, you'll die. And we covered this in the last episode, and we talked about, in the day when the heavens and the earth were created versus the 6 days of Genesis 1. That when you use the phrase in the day, it's kind of a figure of speech. It might mean in the very day or in the same day. And if it does mean that, it's usually specified in Hebrew, in the very day or in the same day, so that okay, in that specific day. So in the day can mean more than just in the very same day. It can mean when. Now, that, I think, does not completely satisfy the curiosity about why Adam and Eve didn't drop dead when they ate the fruit. It took many years before they died. But we'll get to that when we get to chapter 3. Right now we're in chapter 2. I think that's good enough as a foreshadowing of the next episode. There you go.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to that. That is intriguing. Well, chapter 2 concludes, of course, with the creation of Eve, the first woman. And it starts with God's declaration that it's not good that man should be alone. A verse that gets quoted at lots of weddings. It's one of those passages, isn't it, that gets used?
Yes.
But it's also, interestingly, it's another, we talked last episode, didn't we, about lots of differences between chapter 1 and chapter 2. And this is another difference between chapter 1 and chapter 2, because in chapter 1, when God makes something, he pronounces it good, multiple times through Genesis 1, and God saw that it was good. But here in chapter 2, this is the first time that God makes something and actually specifically says it's not good. It's not good that man is alone. And why isn't it good? Well, the answer's simple. there's no woman. The man is alone. There is no woman. That's it.
Yeah, that's definitely not good. The blessing, it's really interesting in the first chapter when God tells them to be fruitful and multiply. We always skip the first phrase there, and that is God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. There's a blessing that's involved in having children, and without the woman, there's not going to be that blessing, and that's not good. So, we should also point out here, I think, rather importantly, that the word used to describe the woman here, the helper, right? I will make a helper for him. That word is etzer, in Hebrew. Now, outside of Genesis 2, that word is used 20 times in the rest of the Old Testament. And of those 20, 16 times it's used for God himself. So, for example, Psalm 121 is a famous example. I will lift up my eyes unto the hills. From whence does my etzer come? Where does my help come from? My etzer comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. So the Hebrew Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible there is very, very biased in using etzer for God's help. And I think that's kind of an important thing to stop and think about, because I think a lot of people, look at Christianity as being this horrible religion that has a very bad view of women. And I'll admit there are some Christians who do have very bad views of women. But etzer, that's a divine title. It's not, go make me a sandwich, woman. It is a divine title of help. So it's not subservient. It's not denigrating, anything like that. It's an honor to be etzer.
Yeah. And what's kind of interesting, a bit odd, really, when you think about it, is that after God declares that it's not good that man should be alone, what does he do? He brings the animals and the birds to Adam so that he could name them. And the reason I say that's odd is because you might think that, having recognized that it's not good that the man is alone, you would think that God would just immediately step in and fix it. He would put it right, and he would make Eve. But he doesn't. He brings the animals to Adam, which is kind of interesting. And lots of implications, I think. But I mean, one here that is kind of sort of incidental in some ways, but it's important for us as creationists. This is actually one of the passages that creationists have used to support the existence of created kinds, of course. If Adam Adam was made on the sixth day, we don't know exactly when he was made, but let's say he was made, sometime in the morning. Could he have had the time? This is one of the things skeptics sometimes say. Could Adam have had the time to name every individual species of animal that was kind of brought to him on that day, single afternoon, going through millions and millions and millions of species? But of course, if God is only bringing the created kinds to Adam, then of course that is far fewer animals. So I think that's an interesting implication here of Adam naming the animals, that probably there were far fewer animals than we imagine.
Yeah, that's definitely the common creationist reading of the passage. And I would also remind us what we talked about last time. I think you mentioned this, in the last episode of the series where we looked at contradictions or alleged contradictions. You pointed out these are beasts of the field, not beasts of the earth. So in Genesis 1, it's a different description of the animals. And the beasts of the field there matches the plants of the field, which then suggests that we're talking about specifically agricultural animals that would be of use to Adam and Eve. And I think that's consistent, right, with the rest of the chapter, right? So there's no creeping things here. There's no beasts of the earth mentioned. So it could be that this isn't even all the animals, that this is just some of the animals that Adam is naming. But anyway, that's a less common reading. You've hit the more common reading that Adam is naming the created kinds, the individual created kinds. So Adam goes through all these animals. He doesn't find any etzer. And again, I'm going to throw in a little personal side note here. Surely animals would be of help to Adam. Animals would be, beasts of burden and all sorts of things. And you would think that Adam would recognize, oh yeah, that's going to be good for hauling things and that's going to be good for whatever. But he just concludes there's no etzer here. There's no help for me here. And I think that again elevates the idea of what etzer is supposed to be, because it's not just labor. It's not just somebody who's going to work for you. It's something special. It's an elevated position, and animals do not fill that. They can't take that position of honor.
Yeah, absolutely right. So Adam is unable to find his etzer, and so what happens? Well, we read that God puts him into a deep sleep. He takes a rib, in quotation marks, a rib, and creates the woman. And you talked earlier about kind of common creationist folklore. Well, here's another little bit of common creationist folklore that I have sometimes heard, where people will say, even today, men have one fewer pair of ribs than women, because God took Adam's rib to make the woman. And that is folklore.
Yes.
Men and women do not have different numbers of ribs.
Correct.
They have the same number of ribs.
Yes.
So we'll make that clear. Just if you're sort of under that misapprehension, that is not true, even though you may have heard that. And also, it's worth just mentioning the word rib, and that's why I kind of put it in quotation marks. It's not specific to rib. The word that's used just means side. It's Adam's side. And so I think, we have to just be careful when this doesn't necessarily refer specifically to the ribs as a piece of anatomy as we know them. So, so you may have heard that sort of myth about the ribs. It's not true.
It's not true.
It's not true. What we do know is that God had made Adam, of course, from the dust of the ground. He makes Eve, the woman, from him, from his side. So it's a kind of different sort of creation. So, Adam's creation, we said earlier, was very humble. Adam is made from the dirt. He's called dirt. Eve comes from Adam's side to be his helper, to be his etzer. And that, I think, is significant as well. As we think about that kind of exalted status of women in the Bible. And we also see it in Adam's reaction, I think. So when Adam wakes up, when God sort of brings, Adam wakes up and God brings Eve to Adam, presents Eve to Adam. Interestingly, exactly the thing that he does with the animals, he brings them to Adam. Well, he brings Eve to Adam to so he can see her. And what's his reaction? Well, his reaction is, I think, to burst into song. You will notice in your Bibles that very often what Adam says is kind of indented in the text to mark it out as something different. This is sort of poetic verse. So Adam sort of is delighted as he sees
suddenly
him, in a way that he wasn't with any of the animals.
Yeah, suddenly it's like a musical. Suddenly now we're gonna have a musical number here, and I wonder if it's like a Disney where the animals are dancing around and doing a number. I don't know, but that indentation there is indicating that in the modern Bible anyway, the indentation is kind of indicating that there's a meter, there's a rhythm to those statements there. This at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. So that's the phrase.
Yeah.
It's a short song, if it is a song.
Yeah.
In Hebrew, that the woman there is Isha. The man is Ish. And notice this is not a personal name yet. She's still the woman. He'll give her a personal name later, but for now, it's Dirt and the woman. Adam and the woman. So that the name that he gives her right there is a category name, which again I think sort of gives us a clue that the names that he gave the animals, it's not Bob and Sammy and George, it's elephant and horse and cow or whatever. Okay, so that brings us then at last to the final conclusion of this chapter. And this is where the author is informing us that this is where marriage comes from. This introduction of Adam to the woman in the Garden of Eden. And when Adam says, she's flesh of my flesh, they are one flesh, they talk about the man leaving his father and mother, cleaving to his wife, and they become one flesh. Yeah, that's literally true for Adam and Eve, right? They are literally made from the same flesh. They are one flesh. And of course, the implication there is marital intimacy, sexual intimacy, and that all kind of blurs together here from, Adam and Eve being made from the same body to the final conclusion of the chapter where they are both naked and unashamed. The whole marital intimacy is in full view, literally, there in the garden in a way that you might not quite catch it unless you're paying attention.
Yeah, and they're both described as sort of naked, unashamed, and of course that's also foreshadowing for us again. Just like dust foreshadows the curse. Likewise here, this nakedness is pointed out, and it foreshadows what's going to happen at the time of the fall when they eat the fruit, and the way that their attitude to their nakedness, to their bodies changes. So yeah, there's some foreshadowing going on, and we're going to come on to that obviously in future episodes. But anything else, Todd, you think we should address before we close out this episode?
Well, I think that's good enough. We've covered all the main points. We have stirred up some controversy. So you be sure to tell us in emphatic terms when you think rain started. That'll be exciting. And then, I think we're good. And I got obviously next in this series, we're going to be taking a look at the fall and what happened when the serpent comes into the garden and starts enticing Eve to take the fruit. But for now, I think that wraps it all up.
Yeah. So, join us for that next episode. Of course, this is an intermittent series, so our next episode is probably not going to be a 101 episode.
Probably not.
But we will definitely come back to Genesis 3 at some point. But for now, thanks for joining us again. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope that you'll join us in 2 weeks' time for our next episode. So we'll see you then. Take care.
See you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Creation. For more information, visit us at letstalkcreation.org, where you'll find an archive of past episodes and all our show notes. If you'd like to leave a comment or make a suggestion, you can find us on all the major social media platforms. Let's Talk Creation is brought to you in the U.S. by Core Academy of Science and in the U.K. by Biblical Creation Trust. As a listener-supported ministry, we are grateful for all of your financial support. Find out how you can make a contribution at our website, letstalkcreation.org. Also remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. Thanks, and see you next time.